you often think about cowboys and Indians, but what about the time before that? How did the ancient people strive off this land? Hello everyone, my name is Lashanda Yazzie. I'm a student with Northern Arizona University, and what we'll do today is go ahead and look at the three plants, the Utah juniper, the yucca, and the green thread. And all these plants can be found here in Navajo National Monument. These three plants were used by the ancient Pueblo people who strived here in Taygete Canyon, and this national monument actually protects three of those cliff dwellings that were made by the ancient Pueblo people. And these plants are actually still surprisingly used today by the Hopi and the Navajo tribes. So why don't you go ahead and come follow me, and we'll go ahead and look at a couple of these. This is a Utah juniper tree, and it's found in almost every region of the Navajo Nation. The Pueblo people used the bigger trunk, or the trunk of the juniper tree, for the roof beams. And they had also gotten the bark from the tree, and they would braid it into ropes. And they would coil the bark as well into rings for the pottery to kind of hold it like as a carrier for their pottery. And they would also use the juniper trees as fire starters and firewood. The Hopi tribe have been known to boil the leaves of the juniper tree for a laxative, and also they've eaten the berries. Navajos have, they use the branches of the juniper tree, and what they do is they'll burn it, so they'll burn it all the way to ashes. And this juniper ash is known as good. And what they'll do is they'll add it into a traditional meal called blue mush. And this blue mush was eaten and made, prepared for centuries. And in recent studies, they found that the juniper ash, for every 1 gram of juniper ash, there was 280 milligrams of calcium within that juniper ash. And the Navajos would, they had known for many centuries that using juniper ash in their blue mush and in other traditional foods, that it was very nutrient. So that was very interesting. How did the ancient people know that using juniper, especially the ash like I had talked about, how did they know that that was part of, you know, health benefits, that it would give them nutrients? They didn't have a research team, they didn't have an internet to look up things like this. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and look at another plant that provides a lot more health benefits than the juniper tree. The next plant we'll look at is called the green thread plant, and it can only be found during the summer and the spring months. So we won't find any live ones here in the monument. The green thread plant was used by the ancient Pueblo people for the common cold, muscle stiffness, and for anxious minds. Today, green thread is picked and rinsed and dried, and it's tied into these little bundles. And what you can see here are the little flowers that bloom from the green thread, and this is a signature look to know exactly that it is green thread and not a different kind of plant. Green thread is also known as Navajo tea or Hopi tea, and the reason why they're in bundles like this is because it's easier to boil. And what some people do too is they'll break them up into little fragments, and they'll use that and they'll let it seep in hot water. And another thing that they've done too is they've commercialized Navajo tea, and those come in the regular little tea bags, and those can be found on the internet and things like that. But for the most part, Navajos and Hopis will go out and they'll you know, collect their own set of teas, and this is what they commonly look like. Sometimes they'll have strings attached here, and you know, they'll kind of string them out like that and have them. But in the ancient times, and centuries ago, or through the centuries, what they've done is they'll collect these during the spring and the summer when they're fresh and ready to be picked, and they'll pick enough so that way it lasts through the winter. Navajo tea and Hopi tea is mainly consumed nowadays for upset stomachs, acid reflux, as well as sore muscles, and it can help with UTI. And luteolin is actually an anti-inflammatory, so that's what's mainly contained here in the green thread. This caffeine-free tea, when it's brewed, it gives off a really dark red color, and it also has a really sweet, earthy taste, and a lot of people add sugar or honey to it for personal taste. So now that we've looked at two plants that have health benefits for inside the body, we'll go ahead and look at another plant that has benefits for the outside of the body. This is a yucca plant. The ancient Pueblos shredded the leaves to make ropes and cords, and when the yucca fruit, when it bloomed, they would eat it. Today the yucca fruit is picked for sheep and livestock. It's kind of known like as a treat to the livestock. And the yucca plant leaves are used in various Navajo and Hopi ceremonies, along with some of the ceremonial games that they have and the dances. And when you dig up this plant at the bottom, there's the root, and what the Navajos and the Hopis use the root for is as soap. So when you get underneath the yucca and you dig out the root, you peel back the top layer, and you'll just kind of get the soap together, and you'll just rub them together to create the soap. This is what the Navajos and Hopis use in today's ceremonies as a cleansing. So, and what they'll do is they'll wash themselves with the yucca soap, and instead of pouring the water down the drain, they'll pour the water back into the soil. It's kind of to give back to Mother Nature, and kind of as a thank you, as an offering, because, you know, back then they didn't have drainages and things like that. So everything that they used, if they had picked the yucca, if they had picked the root, it would all go back into the soil, which is still practiced today. This yucca plant is also a part of our clan system, the Navajo clan system, which is actually my first clan. It's Hashkahadzohe, and the English translation for that is yucca fruit strung out in a line clan. Now that we've gone over the yucca and the other plants, we'll go ahead and head over to a viewpoint as the day comes to an end. Today we looked at three different plants: the Utah juniper, the green thread, and the yucca. These plants were used by the ancient Pueblos, and the uses and practices have strived through all these centuries because they're still practiced today. The traditional foods of the Hopi and the Navajo give us an insight of how the ancient Pueblo people were able to strive and live off this land. They knew what plants to use that benefited their health, and how they knew that, we're not completely sure, but science today does explain that some of these plants do have health benefits, like how we discussed earlier. The ancient Pueblos also knew which plants were better for tool making and for fabricating weapons, and even those survived through all these centuries because now they're in museums and they're in galleries, and even in their cliff dwellings they're well made because they've survived all these centuries. And you know, we're looking at them here like Navajo National Monument. They have been able to preserve and restore some of them, but for the most part they're still standing, and that's because the ancient Pueblo people knew which trees and which plants and the type of mud and soil to use for their homes. This concludes the walking tour of Navajo National Monument and the three plants, the Utah juniper, the green thread, and the yucca, and how they were used throughout the ancient times and today. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you come and swing by the National Monument.